Welcome back, everybody, to Watcher of All Things. This is my podcast where I talk movies, TV shows, and all things entertainment. And today, it is a very special episode. Episode 50. 50 episodes. That is absolutely crazy. And it's a longer episode where we're going to talk Nosferatu and A Complete Unknown. It is a double feature today, a holiday special. I hope you've all had a wonderful Christmas, all of your holiday season. I hope you are taking the time to relax, be with the ones you love, your friends, your family. I have. That's why this episode is coming out a few hours later rather than Sunday night at midnight. This will come out about Monday afternoon. Been a great week. I was away for the week and now I'm back. I've seen both of these movies. I saw Nosferatu on a Friday night and I saw the matinee of A Complete Unknown, and I cannot wait to talk about them, to be honest. 50 episodes is pretty crazy and I'm very excited that we have reached this milestone already. Been pretty smooth sailing so far. I'm surprised there hasn't been like, oh, I have to miss this week because blah, blah, blah. I've been pretty committed and I'm proud of myself. It's important to think of your accomplishments. I guess accomplishments. You know, we've had some press following the show. I'm just kidding, of course. But one actor from Emilia Perez did like randomly at like 2 a.m. this week on my personal Instagram account. He liked one of my photos at, probably 2 a.m. It's Mark Ivaner, who's an Israeli-Ukrainian actor that lives in the U.S. and works in the world. Well, he's in Emilia Perez and random time at 2 a.m. But it's been a great week. I seriously enjoyed my holidays with my family, and I'm happy to be back talking about Nosferatu and A Complete Unknown. Okay, as I say every week, timestamps below. If you just want to know the non-spoilers of Nosferatu and A Complete Unknown, that's fine. You don't want anything spoiled, even though one of them is literally like 100-year-old story and the other is just kind of a true story based on a musician that's still alive. Lots of news to talk to before we get into both of our reviews then, and what else I watched after our reviews. I have so much stuff to talk about. A lot of Christmas stuff, but a lot of other stuff as well, because I've been catching up on movies outside of everything. So it's going to be a jam-packed episode. So sit back, enjoy the ride. Lots to talk about. Timestamps below and your chapters if you're on streamers or YouTube or whatever. Enjoy the episode. Let's get into the news. Our first piece of news is some good news. It is DC's Creature Commandos has been renewed for season 2. I've not watched the latest episode, which was episode 6, I believe. Episode 5, episode 6. It's the one with Clayface first in it. I did my Weasel review last week, and I absolutely loved it. I think I talked about it on the episode last week. I'm not sure, but this is really great news, and I think the show has been extremely successful. I know the streaming numbers have been really good for it. It's been the most popular show on HBO Max for every week running consistently, with Dune Prophecy behind it. So I'm not really surprised this has happened, and I think a lot of the fans have really enjoyed it. It's had very good reviews, just like Peacemaker. I think they started with one season in mind, and then because of the public reaction, they're like, yeah, you know what? Why not? Let's do a second season. And I like that DC doesn't really have a strict roadmap of what needs to happen and what needs to be done in all these different chapters and how everything needs to tie together. It's kind of just like, what stories are good, what scripts are greenlit that are ready to go and polished, and we'll get into another thing that is delayed yet again this week in a moment, but I think this is really great news. I'm loving Creature Commandos. I think it's a fun misfit team. Probably for season 2, it's going to be a completely different team is what I would think, because kind of spoilers, I guess, but most of them have died so far, or at least G.I. Robot has. So are they going to make it a completely different team led by Cersei? I haven't watched episode 5, so for all I know, she dies in episode 5, but I like the cast. I like the voice actors. I'm excited to see them in live action as well. Like, we're going to see Rick Flag Sr. in Peacemaker season 2 and Superman, so we know he's going to be at least translated to live action. We've already seen Weasel in live action. Same with Amanda Waller and everyone else that's kind of the live action characters from Suicide Squad have carried over into Creature Commandos that are alive. So I don't know. I'm excited. I see this as good news. I think they should reward what gets, people's attention. Why not? It'd be fan interacted, but don't have a strict plan like Marvel seems to have. Whereas, I think Marvel has just really kind of lost its way and is becoming kind of what DC was 10 years ago with the Snyderverse, of greenlighting the wrong things and being super strict in what it wants to tell and kind of telling the wrong stories of things that people don't really care about, and seemingly not really having a roadmap of where we want this all to go. It feels very unguided, the Marvel stuff right now, and I like that DC is unguided but with a purpose. It's kind of just vibes and let's just make stuff that's fun and can be individual and people don't have to do their homework to enjoy. So this is great news. news. I'm really happy for everybody involved in that project because it is a great cast and it's a great story. But let's get into a big announcement in the film world this week. Christopher Nolan has announced his new film, The Odyssey. So Universal Pictures announced Christopher Nolan's next film, The Odyssey, is a mythic action epic shot across the world using brand new IMAX technology. The film brings Homer's foundational saga to IMAX film screens for the first time and opens in theaters everywhere on July 17, 2026. It follows the tale of Odysseus and his 10-year journey home after the Trojan War, starring Tom Holland, Zendaya, Anne Hathaway, Matt Damon, Lupita Nyong'o, and Robert Pattinson, as well as Charlize Theron, right? She's in it. Now, this is like one of the oldest texts ever. You know, like the Odyssey is of an extremely old text. Everyone on Twitter was raving like, holy shit, this is like converting the Bible to live action. And I've never read it. A ton of people were being snobs online of like, I've read it actually. And it is fascinating that Nolan is just going like full mythic, because I feel like after Tenet, he really wanted to course correct and be like, hey, I need to stick with kind of historical and just stay in the purely nonfiction with Oppenheimer. And now he's just swinging the needle the complete other way. And as for the new IMAX technology, I saw they did a presentation about like what this new technology will involve, and I know that it involves just a quieter camera was the main takeaway that I had, because there is this thing with IMAX cameras, they are very loud, like on set, extremely loud, and it can be distracting for actors is what I can understand. Like Jordan Peele was talking about that it's very hard to work with the IMAX camera because it's loud as good as it looks, but this new quieter technology is probably going to be a huge aspect. There's a bunch of other technical things about it that honestly I don't really get, or I don't remember. What the main thing that stuck out to me was the fact that it's quieter, but also this is a big story to convert. It's very mythic. It involves monsters and three-headed lizards or big cyclopses and stuff like that. Just yesterday, my girlfriend was asking about it, like, oh, Tom Holland, do you think he's going to be good in that? Because, you know, he's been in a few movies that maybe haven't done as well, but I think the thing about Tom Holland is he's a very good actor, and when he works with competent filmmakers, I think people really see how much he shines. Like he did that film, what was it, The Lost City of Z with Robert Pattinson, and no, it wasn't Boyd Holbrook. Who's the other guy from Sons of Anarchy that was in it? And people seem to really like that and enjoy Tom Holland's performance. When he works with competent filmmakers, he's very good. Like even in Spider-Man, he's really good in every performance as much as it is just Spider-Man. But like in an Uncharted film, it's hard for him to shine when it's kind of a cheesy action film with Mark Wahlberg, you know? So I'm really excited for him to show off his acting chops. There is rumors that apparently Austin Butler was first offered the role that Robert Pattinson got, but because of Robert Pattinson's schedule clearing up, which we'll talk about in a moment, unfortunately, it looks like he was able to just get the offer right away. James Gunn has also kind of debunked a certain delay because of the Christopher Nolan movie, saying, no, that would have been fine. Like there was no issues between the crossovers or whatever. Either way, I'm very excited for this. I feel like Christopher Nolan hasn't done a fully like big epic thing in a while. Tenet was the last thing, but even that was pretty grounded in more military sci-fi versus like this is just going to be a huge massive swing, and it's going to be very mythical and very just crazy. I don't think he's ever done anything like this. Like even The Prestige is magic, but it's still sort of very realistically done, versus I think this is going to be very mind-blowing. And I guess now he's Sir Christopher Nolan, but he's really going in another direction, and I'm excited to see what he does. We have 2 years until it comes out. It's going to be a long wait, but I love a huge big swing, and it's going to be fun seeing the new technology on display as well. I think this is going to be a major film to come out, and it's going to draw a lot of people in, especially after Oppenheimer. Like Oppenheimer was a 3-hour historical kind of biopic about the guy who invented the bomb, but this is going to draw in a lot of people who are fans of Matt Damon, Tom Holland, Zendaya, like Lupita Nyong'o, Robert Pattinson, everybody. This is a big star-studded cast. People that maybe didn't know Christopher Nolan before but saw Oppenheimer because of Barbenheimer are going to be like, oh, I liked Oppenheimer, or I saw that, and now he's working with other actors I know. So I think, I don't know, it could make $1 billion. Oppenheimer was really close, so if it has a marketing like Oppenheimer, or it happens to come out the same day and it's like a Barbenheimer 2 situation or something, maybe it comes out with Narnia, so we get the Narnacy or something like that. Hard to imagine what this is going to look like, but I'm very excited. I almost bought the Odyssey, it's a book of poems, I guess. I almost bought it on Amazon, but I was like, no, I kind of want to to go in blind and just experience the story and do what I did with Dune, which was a world I knew nothing about, and then I saw the movies and I loved it, and then I went back and read the books to be like, oh, it's interesting how they adapted that. I think, honestly, that's what I'm going to do with the Odyssey. All right, well, let's get into the delays. So the Batman Part 2 has been delayed a year to October 2027. Now, lots of speculation surrounding this, like we talked about last week. Is he going to join the DCU? Are they rewriting it because he's joining the DCU? What's going on with this? Well, James Gunn has already come out and said the delay is true, but the only reason for the delay is there isn't a full script yet. Those of you who follow me here probably know that already. Matt is committed to making the best film he possibly can, and no one can accurately guess exactly how long a script will take to write. Once there's a finished script, there's around 2 years for pre-production, shooting, and post-production on big films. Now, it's said that allegedly it's still going to shoot this summer. This comes from The Hollywood Reporter, who said Matt Reeves' The Batman sequel, which is currently untitled, previously being called The Batman Part 2, the film, which had previously been expected to hit theaters in 2025, is expected to go into production in the third quarter of 2025 and is now set for October 1st, 2027. Andy Muschietti also came out and talked about Batman the Brave and the Bold, which apparently he's still directing. He said that movie's delayed, until further notice, and he thinks he's probably just going to go make something else before he does that movie. This movie's also delayed, The Batman Part 2, or what was The Batman Part 2. I think it's going to be like The Trial of the Batman or something. They're going to do something like Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, so it'll be The Batman colon something, or the blah 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 the Batman. I don't know, Beware the Batman. That would be. Now apparently, and I don't want to share what it is, but there is like rumors of, I don't know exactly what it is, that Matt Reeves, people are giving him a lot of grief online of like, oh, why is it taking so long to write, blah blah blah, and all that stuff. Well, can you blame him? He's going through a personal thing right now, and he's still working on the script at the same time. And I don't know, I saw this really good post this week from a guy named Patrick that I follow on social media, who does a lot of like cool cinematography stuff, and he said we live in like a world of overconsumption and immediate consumption where we get something good and it's like you better have something to follow up right away. Like you post a cool video, it gets a lot of likes, you better have a second one right away. And it's the same thing in movies. Like sequels sometimes take a lot of time to make. Alien to Aliens, like I mentioned last week, was 5 or 6 years. So what, it's going to be 5 years between the Batman and the Batman Part 2. I think it's a little frustrating that the movies take place like a month apart or 2 months apart. That's a little frustrating. Maybe you want a little bit more of a time jump in the story. The fact that it's 5 years between what is supposed to be a month apart from each other. But it is interesting. I don't know. There's a few red flags that James Gunn keeps saying, yes, it's not in the DCU, but I don't know what to make of this anymore with all these rumors that Matt Reeves is going to be more involved in the DCU, and there's a Clayface movie taking the place of when the Batman Part 2 was supposed to come out. Apparently the sequel is visual effects heavy. The first one was visual effects heavy as well. That's what people don't get. I think it was like 1,500 plus visual effects shots. So it's not like the first one didn't have tons of visual effects, but the fact that they're making it very clear out loud that the sequel is visual effects heavy, what does that mean? Is it the villain's Clayface or something like that? I don't know. There's just so much uncertainty around this film that sometimes maybe it's good to just shut it all out and just accept the fact that the movie's going to get made, and James Gunn has said it's going to get made, and he's confident that Matt's going to deliver a great movie, and it'll be here when it's here. In my Letterboxd top 4, The Batman is number 1, my favorite movie ever. It is. It straight up is. I love Batman. He's my favorite character. So if this is going to piss off anyone, it's going to piss off me. And I'm bummed that we're not going to see it, but we just got The Penguin, which is a great little bridge, and we're still getting great stuff. Like, we've got so much Batman stuff in the last few years. It's nice to maybe shift the focus to these other characters like Superman or whoever. Whatever. It is what it is. Robert Pattinson's still going to be Batman for at least one more movie. Who knows if it'll be a trilogy? Maybe they're just going to say, look, we're going to give you part 2, but I think you need to wrap it up then because it's taking too long between these films. And then we move into the DCU Batman and it's somebody else. So I don't know. At first I was bummed, but I'm sort of at peace with it. There's been great Batmans. Like Val Kilmer was a great Batman in a bad Batman movie, and he got one shot at it and then he was done. Ben Affleck was an okay Batman in pretty bad movies, and he got 2 films? So what are 3 films with the Flash? Like, this happens all the time. And even I think the Batman, the ending of it is good enough that if we never got a sequel, it would still be a perfectly fine singular Batman movie. At least I can enjoy the Batman by itself. So there's also been some other shift arounds with release dates and sequels. So the Tom Cruise Alejandro Inarritu film is going to come out in the Batman spot in 2026, and then Sinners and Mickey 17 have switched places. So yet another change for Mickey 17, which is actually moving up to March 7th, I think. And and Sinners is moving to April 18th, where Mickey 17 was, because I believe there's only like 2 labs in the world left or something like that can deal with film and converting film to digital or something like that, because Sinners was shot on film, I think. So it's something to do with that the editing process and converting process for distribution's taking a little bit longer, so it needs a few more months for Sinners, versus Mickey 17 has been finished for months, so it's ready to go, so it may as well move up to March and give Sinners that extra spot. So I think most of the delays or move arounds have good reason, and as DC has said, DC Studios at least, they're not going to put out movies that aren't ready, and there simply isn't a script for the Batman Part 2 that's ready, like James Gunn has said multiple times, and Sinners needs more time for the digital to film conversion. So whatever, everything's going to come out when it comes out. I'm at peace. All right, the final piece of news before we get into our double header of reviews. Apparently Netflix has told writers to have characters, quote, announce what they're doing just in case a viewer is busy doing something else while they're watching. So we've talked about on the show a couple times how Netflix really is aiming at the market of second screen entertainment. So something that you can watch while you're on your phone or you're shopping online on your laptop or whatever. That is kind of what Netflix's wheelhouse is apparently now. This news doesn't surprise me at all. Netflix makes a lot of stuff that is very simple to understand, lacks, major details that if you missed an episode, honestly, you could probably catch up and skip it. So you can follow along without having to miss plot strands, and there's barely been any pushback until now. Several screenwriters who've worked for the streamer are telling the outlet that a common note from the company executives is to have characters purposely lay out exposition to the wandering viewer. After all, focusing your time on a 90-minute movie is certainly not an option for the token Netflix viewer. This is just sad. I feel like Netflix is maybe the only streaming service that is doing it. Netflix is like the fast food of streamers. I feel like they make kind of the dumbest stuff, and I mean that in a nice way, like dumb things that you can kind of follow along while you're folding laundry, while you're doing whatever. If you're working on your phone or having to do something on your phone while you're watching something, it's almost just like radio shows where you can just listen and you'll kind of get what's going on loosely, or you can watch it from another room. So it's kind of sad to read that, but I think it is realistic of what Netflix's wheelhouse is. Second screen entertainment. Shows like Stranger Things, or even Squid Game, if you watch with English dubs on it, you could probably just get it while you're doing other stuff or follow along. Or I don't know, what are other Netflix originals? I barely watch a lot of Netflix originals. I watch their movies, Rebel Ridge and Carry On. Good movies, but you could probably understand them while you're doing something, and there's not tons of complexity that you're going to miss out on. Kind of depressing to read that, but I'm not shocked, I guess. And I guess Stranger Things has wrapped their final season or whatever this week, and dear God, I cannot wait for that show to be finished. I mean, these characters have been around for 11 years now, and they're supposed to be still super young, but they're all almost hitting their 30s or whatever. Just dear God, end the madness already. And I'm a little bit over Netflix, but I think that's going to do it for the news. So some delays, some casting news, some big project announcements. I'm ready for 2 big reviews, so timestamps below. As I said, now let's jump into Nosferatu. Nosferatu is a 2024 horror drama film coming in at 2 hours and 12 minutes. It is directed by Robert Eggers and written by Robert Eggers with a budget of $50 million. Pretty good for what's going to be a massive popular movie. Currently has 86% on Rotten Tomatoes, 7.9 on IMDb, 3.9 out of 5 average rating on Letterboxd, with 4 stars being the mode rating, and 78 on Metacritic. Box office looking really good, like it's going to make at least $40 million over the 5-day holiday period. I mean, pretty good for a $50 million movie. It's going to make its budget back very quickly. The synopsis: a gothic tale of obsession between a haunted young woman and the terrifying vampire infatuated with her, causing untold horror in its wake. The film stars Lily Rose Depp as Ellen Hutter, Bill Skarsgård as Count Orlok, Nicholas Hoult as Thomas Hutter, Willem Dafoe as Professor Albin Ebenhart von Franz, Aaron Taylor Johnson as Friedrich Harding, Emma Corrin as Anna Harding, Ralph Ineson as Dr. Wilhelm Sievers, Simon McBurney as Nock, and a whole bunch of other people. Okay, Nosferatu, and as I said in summer, this is one of my top 5 most anticipated movies in the rest of the year. Well, it didn't let me down. This was pretty enjoyable. It's moody, atmospheric, it's erotic, and it's just a great film to see in theater. So what's Nosferatu if you don't know? If you're like me and you haven't seen anything that's Nosferatu, going into this, I was like, is this not just Dracula? Well, here's what Wikipedia said. So Nosferatu was produced by Prana Film and is an unauthorized and unofficial adaptation of Bram Stoker's 1897 novel Dracula. Various names and other details were changed from the novel, including Count Dracula being renamed Count Orlok, and then finally Nosferatu, an archaic Romanian word with a suggested etymology, Nosferatu, meaning the offensive one or the insufferable one. Although these changes are often represented as a defense against copyright infringement, the original German intertitles acknowledged Dracula as the source. Even with several details altered, Stoker's heirs sued over the adaptation, and a court ruling ordered all copies of the film to be destroyed. However, several prints of Nosferatu survived, and the film came to be regarded as an influential masterpiece of cinema and the horror genre. So yes, it's essentially Dracula. It's a love triangle with a vampire and two regular people. So let's start with the cast, as we always do. Lily Rose Depp as Ellen Hunter. Mesmerizing. If the Academy Awards didn't hate horror movies, she would be winning an Oscar this coming March. Like, I'm not trying to compare apples to oranges or whatever and trying to just constantly compare all of these performances, but this is the best actress winning performance of the year for me. This is way better than Mikey Madison and Honora. This blew me away. She is so unhinged in this and just perfect and measured and everything. Like, I was insanely shocked at how great Lily Rose Depp is in this. Bill Skarsgård as Count Orlok. Great voice and physicality. I just found his look to be not what I expected in a great way, and I'll talk about that in spoilers as well, I think, because he's not really shown in any of the trailers. I think they put out a clip of his voice online, which if you haven't heard, don't watch it or whatever. Like, it's great to just go in kind of blind. I wish I didn't listen to the recording of his voice because his voice is awesome in this, but his look I wasn't really that crazy about, or I didn't really find it that special, especially considering like I know how Nosferatu looked in the previous movies, and that was a lot more fun than it is here. Still though, he's really great. Nicholas Hoult as Thomas Hutter, fantastic. He's given two outstanding performances this year, and I have no clue why he's not in like the nominations discussions. I've loved his work this year with Juror Number 2, which we'll talk about later in the episode, but I think he is so good in this. He plays the husband of Ellen, who's this normal dude, and be like, haha, yes, okay, Ellen, you're crazy, and then he goes through some stuff and he's like, oh, never mind, she's not crazy, and everyone thinks maybe, you know, he's telling the truth but she's not, or whatever. He's so good in it, and him and Lily Rose Depp just have such good chemistry in this, and they go so well together as this team. Yeah, I loved his performance. He's so good. Willem Dafoe as Professor Albin Ebenhard von Franz. He was a lot of fun, and he's a little kooky, and honestly I wish they leaned into that a little bit more, but it felt like, I don't know, Willem Dafoe, it's fun seeing him in the Robert Eggers movies. He's just a fun addition, and apparently he's already offered Willem Dafoe a spot in his next two movies, so I'm excited for that, and he's very good in this. I think he comes into the story a little bit late and feels like more of an addition that's necessary because of the adaptations versus a necessary character, but I still really liked him. Aaron Taylor Johnson as Friedrich Harding, maybe the outlier of this movie. I felt he was kind of acting in a different movie than everyone else. Like, everyone else feels like they're giving a super authentic performance, while he feels a little bit more melodramatic or like tongue-in-cheek about the whole thing. Like, he's trying to play it a little bit more for comedy, whereas I felt everyone else, there's funny things about it, but they're being very serious about the matter and just playing it straight, versus Aaron Taylor Johnson felt like it felt like he was underselling the scenes a little bit, and he was being a little bit too melodramatic. It's good to be melodramatic in Nosferatu, but he's a little bit too much. And then Emma Corrin as Anna Harding, Friedrich's wife. They're good, constantly trying to be a good friend to Ellen, while also still like agreeing with the times and being like, oh, Ellen, you just miss your husband. Very interesting in this role. They've given two pretty good performances this year with Deadpool and Wolverine, as well as this. And then just quickly, Ralph Ineson as Dr. Wilhelm Sievers, pretty good as well. He's got a great voice. I'm excited for his Galactus, but nothing special from his character, I find. I don't know, he's just kind of this doctor that's telling us a lot of the information about the story. And then finally, I just want to say Simon McBurney as Knock. I was fighting so hard in the theater to remember, what do I know this guy from? Then I was like, oh, he's in Harry Potter and the Mission Impossible movies. He's the villain in Rogue Nation, right? The fifth one, and he's also in Fallout. And oh my god, I was struggling so hard. Like, what do I know the guy playing Knock from? And he was just unrecognizable to me because I'm so used to seeing him in a certain way. So he's great in it as well. He gives such an unhinged performance that's so much fun. The cast overall, like the ensemble, is just awesome. The lack of iPhone face in this was admirable. Even with everyone's perfect teeth, everybody still looks like they're from 1838. The hair is perfect. The facial hair is perfect. The costumes are just insane. I appreciated it deeply. Okay, let's get into the story. So yeah, like I said, it's Dracula, Nosferatu, the classic stuff. And as a new new, inexperienced Nosferatu Dracula fan, I really liked the story of this film. Like, I thought it was serving up a lot of interesting questions and dynamics, and like, does evil come within, or are we drawn to it? What is this? And as much as I don't know a lot of stuff about this, I know that Ellen is not really an important character. She's an important character in previous versions, but the story's not really told from her point of view. So I thought Eggers' decision to make Ellen the real focus of this version was actually super effective, and it makes this a much more human story than Orlok-centered. And Lily Rose Depp especially, like I said, leads this film so well, brings an unhinged element to the story as well. Like, every time she's going through something crazy, you cannot believe what you're watching, and she's just acting the hell out of it. There's no special effects on her or whatever, other than like blood or whatever, like in the trailer, blood pouring out of her eyes and mouth, but her contorting her body and stuff like that is just wild to watch. And it also felt like the story was updated a little bit to talk about themes of the time and make it a little more relevant to today. So like the treatment of women and the sanity of women, of like, if they have an extraordinary experience, they're insane and they need to be tied to a bed. But if a guy goes through it, then it's like, oh my God, there's a plague on us and all this stuff. So I don't know, Ellen's treated as crazy because, like, yes, this is a wild thing that's happening, but Nicholas Holt's character, like he says in the trailer, remember this is in the trailer, has seen this thing, and everyone treats him with the utmost respect and believes him immediately. So I don't know, it's fun how Eggers updated some parts. I think in the first act and third act, he really serves up a lot of interesting things, versus the second act we'll talk about in a little bit. But the first act of the movie was some of the best world building this year. It builds so much anticipation of Orlok and the fear everyone near Transylvania has of him. It also just like establishes the language, the aesthetic, and the character dynamics of this time really well, and it feels very accessible, and it really lets you into the story in an easy way, while also giving us some huge moments right from the get-go. Like the opening credits roll, immediately stuff is happening, and I just really enjoyed that. I really liked how Eggers just set up the environment for his story so well in like the first 45 minutes, and it's just like winding up a bunch of toys basically and just letting them to be set off is what it felt like. He really was establishing so much so well in those first 45 minutes in that first act that I was like, oh, I'm totally in for this ride. Maybe like one of the best first acts of this year. It definitely has some of the best world building this year, along with, say, Furiosa, Dune Part 2, Challengers, like all of my favorite movies of this year. The Substance, I would say the first act of this movie really holds up to the top hitters of this year for me. And I don't know if you have experience with Robert Eggers films. He did this movie called The Witch, which was, the dialect was super different, and this movie is much more accessible compared to, I mean, any of his movies really, but especially The Witch. Like every Eggers film I feel like has been easier to understand and access than the previous one. Going to The Lighthouse from The Witch, I think, was a huge shift, and people found that easier. Then going to The Northman, versus, I think honestly Nosferatu is his simplest film and just his most straightforward film to understand, and there's not really tons to dissect compared to the others. It's definitely the most widely accessible material, and from the trailers, I think the trailers also did a good job conveying that. It's a vampire movie, it's a love story. That's why I think it's making so much money compared to The Northman, which really did not make a lot, I don't think. And I guess we'll stay on Eggers, but let's talk about his directing, because wow, he shot the hell out of this, and there were some mind-blowing sequences in this film, without giving anything away, but like the journey to Orlok's castle that you see in the trailer was just insane. Like one of the most mind-blowing sequences this year, and it's so like psychedelic, and it just messes with your mind, and there's so many amazing shots and angles and camera work and all this really cool stuff that I enjoyed a lot. And there's like a 20-minute, 30-minute stretch where Nicholas Holt's character Thomas gets to his castle. His journey there, all the way to when he leaves the castle, was maybe my favorite part of the movie in a weird way. I don't know, there's a lot of great stuff in this movie, but that just felt like the most daring filmmaking in this film, where he was really just letting loose and giving us these crazy moments. And I think I've seen that's the most discussion of this film, is other than Lily Rose Depp and her amazing scenes, like she knocks it out of the park every scene she's in, but a lot of people have been talking about the approach to Orlok's castle, because the mood, the lighting, and just everything, how this looks is just so pristine in those 30 minutes. Like it's just so nice to look at, and the movie's already so dark and gloomy, but once that sequence starts, it's like any remaining warmth or comfort effort just kind of drains from the screen or drains from this movie. If you thought there was going to be anything enjoyable or peaceful about this, it's just completely sucked out of it, literally, I guess. And yeah, like, it's a very good looking movie. The cinematography was Jarin Blaschka, who's done all of Eggers' films, and I'm really happy he stayed with him because I just like how all of his films have looked to me. Even The Lighthouse, which is fully in black and white, amazingly shot, had some insane cinematography work in it. And same with Nosferatu. I think it's really refreshing that for a movie that's 85% at night, it's shot so well and you can really see everything. Like, I think people at home are not going to have an issue watching this, versus there's a lot of nighttime movies that are very difficult to watch during the day unless you have a completely darked out room, because there's just so much darkness and it's impossible to see. Like, I don't know, I'm thinking of Marvel movies or past DC films that have been hard to see when you're watching during the daytime, versus this is fully like moonlit. Everything is so blue, and even the daytime, it's really pale, it's cold, it feels kind of lifeless, but in a good way. I loved the work, and I'm so happy that there's kind of this continuing look to all of Eggers' films that all have this grayness to them, but in the kindest way possible. I don't mean like, gray in a very gross and like CGI way. I mean, it's a very natural, depressing gray. But also the music. Robin Carolyn did the music, I believe, and it's super effective. It's not a movie that's going for cheap jump scares, but there's so much building tension in certain scenes that it really feels like we're going towards something really great, and the music is just adding such a great layer onto it. And also, even in like the more mundane stuff in the movie, just it ties together the time so well. So, I mean, the world building, the music, the cinematography, the costumes were so great, and I love how historically locked in Robert Eggers is in all of his films. Like, he seems to really set out to be as accurate as possible. All of those things combining really do pay off in scenes where, especially when there's groups of people that are kind of suffering hysteria about a vampire or a plague or whatever it is. I think just those group scenes are so great when everyone's freaking out together, but at the same time, it's just as good when it's like one person being chased by something or two people having a real showdown in a scene. Like, there's just so much craftsmanship going into the massive hysteria. Like, there's one sequence where it really is everything is decimated and it's like a plague has come, and I won't say what happens specifically because it's not really giving anything away, but everyone is just losing their minds. Or even the opening of the film when Nicholas Holt's character Thomas is running to work, and that's not really giving anything away. He goes to work. It's nothing major. That's part of the world building, is showing this like crazy, how tight-knit the streets are and everyone's bumping into each other and all this stuff, and he's living in a lively place in Germany, and it's really cool to see all the music and costumes and every department kind of nailing it, including the acting. And I specifically really liked all of the almost like hunting sequences, whether it's Orlok and Ellen or Orlok and Thomas, like just the stalking things, like in the trailer there's that shot of his hand going over the town. Apparently in the 1922 version it's just like his shadow on a wall, and there's lots of that in this movie as seen in the trailer, but that hand shot going over the town was just mesmerizing. I love every time there's kind of a hunt or a haunt in this of Orlok haunting someone. Those are some of the best scenes. Pacing wise, I mean, Robert Eggers' films are all generally kind of not slow burns, but they're paced a little more slowly to really let the tension build up and people going crazy. Like, I remember watching The Lighthouse and I felt like I had to take a shower after because I just watched two people go insane in front of my very eyes. But his films really do take their time with like long takes of dialogue to let you just sit with the atmosphere, or people just walking around in silence and being spooked by things. And I love it. I love that slow building of atmosphere. Having said that, the second act of this film, I think, is where the major problems are. It feels very disjointed from the first and the third, and the focus kind of shifts to the doctors and Frederick in the story, and the movie becomes a little bit less interesting. I feel like our perspective kind of changes from what was interesting in the first act of being Ellen and Thomas experiencing these crazy things, and then it changes to these doctors all just kind of like living through this procedural. So the first act is setting up so much that you're excited to watch unravel, and then the second act just sort of takes the attention away and makes it more of a procedural, watching doctors solve this mystery when we know what the mystery is. I don't really want to watch them figure it out. I know that people are going crazy on all this stuff. So like, I still enjoyed the second act, but compared to the first and the third act, it really does feel a lot slower and less interesting. You grow super attached to these characters for the first 45 minutes, and then it's like the rug's pulled out from under you because they're a lot less focused. And I get that he's trying to spread out the story and make it, I don't know, a 2-hour plus film of Nosferatu, so you have to really focus on all the ensemble characters. But I don't know, I would have stayed maybe with Ellen and Thomas a little bit more in the second act. But it's also the building of atmosphere atmosphere in the first act, I think, as well. It's not just the characters that we're enjoying, it's the mood feels very different in the second act and the rest of the movie, really. I think the third act kind of goes back to the first act mood, but tonally it feels a little bit mismatched. And it felt like there was a lot of cramming in the second half, as well as like the procedural with the investigation elements. All feels like they're really trying to just deliver information to us as much as they can. And I wasn't a huge fan of that, and it loses a little bit of its horror steam. And I mean, as a horror movie, like I said, it's not really going for huge jump scares. It reminded me a lot of Long Legs, where it's like more aiming for creepy and dark instead of like these huge, gory, disgusting things. But like, having said that, there are gross things in this film that will mess you up. It is a Robert Eggers film, but still, it's not really going for super disturbing, blow your head off graphic stuff. It's much more intimate and dark and dramatic versus other horror movies I've seen this year. I think the movie is working best when it's just embracing Eggers' silly, disturbing storytelling, whether it's like Lily Rose Depp having a freaky seizure and vision, or Nicholas Hoult being haunted by something, or even just embracing how horny this story is. The movie is least interesting in the parts that feel a little tethered to the source material, where Eggers feels the need to deliver the information because it's important to the book. And I think that's a lot that comes from Friedrich and the Doctors, the least interesting stuff. There's rumors that Eggers may be doing a Labyrinth remake, and I sort of hope it's not true. I think I'd like him to stick with original stories and not do another adaptation. I don't know, his past movies, maybe they were short stories or something, I'm not sure, but I still would prefer, I like his more unique visions with his stories that he's writing. And even this, he, wrote the script for it and really changed a lot about it, but it still felt like you're stuck to something, like you're tied to this story that you need to tell and you need to be faithful to. And that's where the second act feels like a lot of information dumping and things just kind of blowing by us and rushing. So if he is doing a Labyrinth remake, I don't know, I hope he can really make it his own and doesn't feel forced. Like in this film, I think he was to really stick to the source material. This was definitely the most tame Eggers film. And it's freaky because it's Nosferatu, but I think The Northman even had like crazier, daring sequences than this, and The Witch and The Lighthouse. Like, I think this was maybe the most plain versus the other films that he's done. But overall, this was a freaking blast. Like, I'm going to get into spoilers in a second, but I saw this at 9:30 on a Friday night after 5 hours on the road and multiple days of Christmas gatherings and all that stuff, and I still had so much fun despite how tired I was. My screening was packed, and everyone was so locked in and entertained. No phones, no talking, maybe like one giggle at the start when something happened, but this was like one of the best cinema experiences I've had in a little while. It was nice to be in a packed house and have everyone just enjoying this. The movie was so much fun and just creepy atmosphere, moody. It's easily Eggers' most accessible film and has a lot less to think about after in comparison to The Lighthouse and The Northman. Like The Northman I thought about for days after and was just thinking about certain things, versus this, I don't know, I saw it 2 days ago and there's not that much to chew on. It's kind of all ties up neatly in a bow at the end, but it's not perfect, but it's still really can't miss filmmaking. This is something I would totally recommend. 4 out of 5 stars. Let's get into spoilers. Okay, spoilers for Nosferatu. Skip to the complete unknown non-spoiler section if you don't want to hear spoilers. So, Orlok's design, let's start with that. I really didn't find it scary or disturbing or anything special. I don't know. I wasn't really disturbed by it. I thought he was going to be this big vampire horror creature, but he has a mustache in the film, and I thought that was kind of weird, and I maybe wanted a longer nose and pointier ears like the past versions to make it a little bit more faithful to the adaptations, I guess. Like, if he's going to, story-wise, really stick as a faithful adaptation, I wish, I don't know, you made him a little creepier and ghoulier and vampire-ish. Like, even his teeth, he didn't really have these 2 massive fangs or anything. He just had like sharp teeth overall. The mustache was just kind of silly to me, but the voice was very effective. Sometimes it was a little hard to understand him because he was drawing his words on so long that it almost felt like cut off. Like, wait, what was he saying at the start of that? But I thought Orlok's design was an interesting take. I just wish they took the mustache away, although they're trying to make it look like 1830s aristocrat or whatever. But still, the mustache, it was a swing, but it certainly did not work for me. Full frontal. Wow. Okay, so yeah, you get a full frontal of Orlok, I think twice in the movie or once, and Nicholas Hoult actually got to keep the prosthetic of Orlok's private parts, so good for him, but very horny movie. Like, I was surprising how little giggling there was throughout this movie, because there are some sequences where you would expect immature people to giggle. It was only at the start when Lily Rose Depp was moaning in the first 10 seconds of the film that I heard one girl behind me giggle, but other than that, everyone was actually, I don't know, kind of locked in. Like I said, everyone was very focused during this movie in the audience, and it was so refreshing. Like what was the last movie I saw where, maybe We Live in Time, there were like a couple of sex scenes where people were giggling a little bit, but in this, everyone was super like, yes, this is necessary, this is part of the story, this is a horny movie, this is what I'm here for. So shout out my audience for being pretty mature. Some of my favorite sequences, I think the boat sequence, which is famous, like Orlok going to the city they're all in Germany from Transylvania. Some of those boat sequences were my favorite, like everyone just seemingly bringing a plague to the city when in fact it's actually Orlok that's killing all of these people, and he's just surviving off of the blood of all the crew members. I loved that, but also like the lighting in the boat was great, and it really was effective with the storm that's happening outside. I thought Robert Eggers was really just directing all of that so well and keeping it very claustrophobic and kind of hopeless on that boat, and just this impending doom coming to the city, which I really enjoyed. Probably the most messed up sequence was Orlok killing the Harding children. That actually left my jaw on the floor. I was like, oh shit, this is dark. He just killed 2 kids to send a message, and he doesn't really take prisoners. So I think that just showed Orlok has no heart. Like, he literally is a beast that does not care about who his victims are. As well as Thomas, Nicholas Holt's character, staying the night at this inn with a Roma community, I believe. He doesn't speak the same language as them, but he's staying, and he can see all the signs of like, oh, these people are very scared of something. He doesn't know what it is, but they're scared of something, and there's crosses everywhere. Some lady is holding garlic up against a window. I loved all that. I thought that was all so effective. And yes, there's lots of rats in this movie. I think they got something like 1,500 rats or something crazy. I don't know what the number is, but I just remember Nicholas Holt has talked about these rats in every interview and how much he hated that and how surprised he was. The rats are very effective. And I know this is in the trailer, but Nock being the kind of orchestrator of this entire plan, so sending Nicholas Holt to Orlok's castle, he sends Thomas there to do the deed and be Orlok's first victim so he can haunt his wife at the same time and stuff like that. I really liked all of that stuff. I thought Nock just like going crazier and crazier. He seems like in his first scene, he seems like this very measured man that is a business guy and is bossing Thomas around versus, his last scene or his second last scene, he's eating a pigeon head. And that was very Robert Eggers. I was like, oh yeah, there he is. He got his disturbing eating something gross, and I feel like he has that at every film or something gross, like whether it's the farting sequence that's funny in The Northman or whatever it is. He always has some freaky shit in every movie he does, and I absolutely loved. Pretty much told, what was his name? Thomas McBurney, or the McBurney guy that plays Nock. He just said like, pop off, just go crazy. I want you to just go insane here. And it was totally effective. And in my opinion, Aaron Taylor Johnson's character Friedrich got what he deserved. The whole movie, he's just this punk ass jerk that's judging Ellen and making her feel like garbage and telling the doctor to tie her down and all this stuff. And Ellen was right the whole time. So I was happy he and his family bit the dust. I have no remorse. I don't care. A justice served, in my opinion. Maybe the best sequence from Aaron Taylor Johnson was when his family dies at the hands of Orlok, and he, instead of going on like this false mission with Thomas, he instead goes to their grave and he dies there. I thought that was like pretty dark, but he was also dying at the same time, right? Now let's talk about the third act, because I didn't want to talk about it in non-spoilers in case it gives stuff away, but the third act was riveting and super effective. Like, I think Willem Dafoe's character, Dr. Franz, works so well because he kind of brings a lot of validation to the story, and he validates Ellen being like, I know this is real, don't worry, and it just feels like finally some closure of someone believing Ellen other than her psycho husband, and they're on the same page. For the first time in the film, someone finally understands Ellen and is like, you're right, we need to do this. And it's just so refreshing in the third act of like, okay, here we go, now we can make a plan. Because there's really no other scenes where two people are in understanding with each other of like, all right, there's a vampire, we need to deal with him. And I also just liked how Ellen takes control of the situation and sends her husband on this fake hunt of like, okay, honey, you're gonna go and burn down the coffin or whatever, but he's not even gonna be there. That was all just super enjoyable to me, of Thomas wanting to be this hero of the day, and it's actually Ellen that's taking control of the situation. So again, Eggers switching that perspective to Ellen I thought was super effective, because you really do from the first minute kind of root for Lily Rose Depp's character, and she is just really in touch with the audience and you really connect with her early on. And like, there's so many parts of the third act that just answer questions really well or give us really good closure. So Willem Dafoe's speech, which is in the trailer, I think, where he's setting the coffin on fire before they try and run back to stop Ellen from killing herself, I thought was super effective. That was one of my favorite speeches of the film. And speaking of Ellen killing herself, like the finale with Ellen killing Orlok after sex, I thought was just really fitting, because the whole time Ellen is kind of having this debate, are we drawn to evil, or does it come from within? And you kind of get the feeling over the movie that she's realizing she's part of this curse. The only reason Orlok keeps coming back is because of her. The opening shot is her and Orlok's first encounter when she's a young girl and invites him in, and vampires only come in if you invite them to, or if they're invited in or something like that. So I thought it was a really fitting finale that Ellen gets this kind of heroic bow out, and she's like, all right, well, I'm gonna kill myself, but it's for the greater good, and it's not Thomas that gets to be a hero, or Friedrich, or anyone else. It's Ellen's story, so it gets to be Ellen that's the hero. And it's also like, you know, it's 2 hours and 12 minutes building up to their sexual encounter, so this big swing at the end is really worth it. And I thought the effect, I like that Orlok didn't just like burn to a crisp and light in flames or whatever. It's like a slow, painful death while he's also still kind of experiencing pleasure, or he's just experienced pleasure, so he's at least dying in her hands, so she's literally responsible for his death. And it's just, I don't know, it's a fascinating third act that I think has so many working parts within it that I really enjoyed. And it's Ellen that keeps him alive, so she's got to be part of his ending, and she also realizes her own positioning within that. I just like that for a lot of the time in these movies, it's not an Ellen character would not be the smartest character. I feel like it's only like Ripley that is the smartest woman in her own movies, but I was happy that Ellen is really, if she's going to be the focus like Robert Eggers wanted to achieve with the story, I like that she's the most competent, she's the smartest, she's always the one that knows exactly what's happening, as much as everyone else thinks she's crazy. It's in the trailer, but the final shot of the movie is the sun coming up from the mountains over the town, and that's the only time in the film where there's sunshine. The rest of the movie, yes, it's daytime and some of it, but it's always like pale, cloudy, raining, or it's just like overcast, and that's just proving that Orlok is this darkness hanging over this town and haunting all of these people. But when he dies, finally the sun can rise, and the sun comes and kills him. Like, it's joy that comes to kill him. So I loved it. The movie's pale and dark, but then you finally get this light of hope at the end of the story. Just quickly, let's go through every major difference that MovieWeb.com says. Every major difference between Nosferatu 2024 and the original film. First up, it's more of a faithful adaptation. So Eggers is actually diligently sticking with the source material, pays homage to the visual landscape established by the parameters of the time, as well as the distinct style used by the original director F.W. Murnau. More/deeper characters, so it's a bigger cast with all of the doctors and Friedrich, as well as Ellen is much more the focus. So Ellen and Orlok, like I said, the shift in perspective, the mustache in the room, Orlok's design is very different from the silent film. So just like little tweaks here and there that I think that worked pretty well. Like, I think you're giving us a lot more to enjoy. It's not a silent film. More people can talk. There can be more people to focus on. So I liked that he kind of pushed these new characters into it. But I think that's going to do it for the Nosferatu section of the show. Overall, yeah, like I said, this was a super rad and fun movie with a really great third act, even if it does kind of, you know, it stumbles at times. And I feel like Eggers is kind of trapped by the adaptation, but it's just good filmmaking in general. I think it's great performances, one of which I think is Oscar worthy, amazing visuals, and so much atmosphere. I would absolutely recommend Nosferatu 4 out of 5, but let's get into A Complete Unknown. A Complete Unknown is a 2024 drama/music film, 2 hours and 20 minutes, directed by James Mangold and written by James Mangold as well as Jay Cox. The budget was 60 to 70 million, so not crazy, but it was delayed a lot by COVID and the strikes, so who knows how that budget was inflated or impacted by that. I'm not sure. Like, this was 5 years in the making, so it's been long delayed and they finally got to make it. Google didn't have it in a nutshell for Nosferatu, but the Google in a nutshell for this film is fascinating, contemplative, and passionate. Reviews are currently pretty good, like 79% on Rotten Tomatoes, 7.8 on IMDb, 3.7 stars on Letterboxd, with the mode rating being 4 stars, and 73% on Metacritic. Like Nosferatu, this is having an extremely good box office weekend. 3-day debut of 11.8 million with a 5-day total of 23.3 million, so it's actually the biggest ever opening for a Searchlight film. The synopsis is: New York, early 1960s. Against the backdrop of a vibrant music scene and tumultuous cultural upheaval, an enigmatic 19-year-old from Minnesota arrives in the West Village with his guitar and revolutionary talent, destined to change the course of American music. The film stars, of course, Timothée Chalamet in the titular role of Bob Dylan, Monica Barbaro, who you might know from Top Gun Maverick, as Joan Baez, Elle Fanning as Sylvie Russo, Edward Norton as Pete Seeger, Boyd Holbrook as Johnny Cash, Scoot McNairy as Woody Guthrie, Dan Fogler as Albert Grossman, Will Harrison as Bob Newirth, Eriko Hatsune as Toshi Seeger, PJ Byrne as Harold Leventhal, Charlie Tahan as Al Cooper, and actually an SNL cast members in this. James Austin Johnson plays Gertis MC. It's an absolutely massive cast. I don't want to go through everyone, but it's a great ensemble. So A Complete Unknown, as I said in my Letterboxd review, if you've read it, I massively dislike biopics. I've never been interested in them. I find them mostly self-aggrandizing and make mountains out of molehills. And while A Complete Unknown sometimes feels like it's doing the latter with everyone's reaction to Bob Dylan's music, being like they heard God for the first time or something like that being played, or they're seeing the gates of heaven, I still seriously enjoyed this. I really had fun with A Complete Unknown. Let's talk about the cast to start, because I feel like that is one of the biggest things about this film that really makes it work. Timothée Chalamet as Bob Dylan, a role he's been preparing for 5 years in the making. Get this man his Oscar. It's happening. It's really between Adrian Brody, Coleman Domingo, and Timmy, and I think he has the edge. Given the relationship between the Academy Awards and biopics, I think Timothée Chalamet might be a lock-in. He is phenomenal in this. I would say he's, unrecognizable, but there's actually so much of himself in this that I really liked as a young artist, and it kind of works in that way. He's very himself, but he's still so camouflaged as Bob Dylan. Like, his Dylan is insane. I was flabbergasted every time he's on screen, and he plays such a complex character that we're going to dive into. But the supporting cast, wow. Like I said, what an ensemble. Edward Norton as Pete Seeger, seriously good. I think he might get a nomination as well. He's just a chill, folk playing fella who sees potential in his little mumbly Western boy. Monica Barbaro as Joan Baez. I know she's trained on the guitar and singing. She's exceptional. Angelic. Her voice is so insane, but she works just so well with a rough-edged Bob Dylan. And same with Elle Fanning as Sylvie Russo. She's awesome. She's constantly just riding Bob and calling him out for his BS and being so mysterious and ridiculous, but also really pushes him as an artist. And we'll get more into the relationship later, but I want to talk about Boyd Holbrook as Johnny Cash. Exceptional. Loved his involvement in this. I had no clue about Cash and Dylan's friendship, but Holbrook adds so much to this story, and they just bounce off each other so well. Like, they have such great chemistry as these two buddies in the industry. One of them, being much older and kind of going through a more crazy lifestyle versus the young Bob coming into the industry. Everyone in this cast is exceptional. Everyone else I mentioned earlier is great, particularly Pete Seeger's wife, Toshi Seeger. I really liked how she played into the story. All of the supporting band members and musicians that interact with Bob I thought were really great as well. But let's talk about the story. So this is based on, according to Wikipedia, it's on the 2015 book Dylan Goes Electric by Elijah Wald. The film portrays Bob Dylan through his earliest folk music success until the momentous controversy over his use of electric instruments at the 1965 Newport Folk Festival. So that's what this is all about, just him kind of revolutionizing the folk scene. So this isn't a typical biopic that follows a star through their entire life, like, I don't know, Rocket Man or the Elvis movie or Bohemian Rhapsody, I think, follows a lot of their journey. This is kind of just like one step in the evolution of an artist from when he's starting out to when he's revolutionizing the industry. So it's a 4-year tale that's really focused on the shifting definitions of rock, folk, and kind of artistry and artistic freedom at this time and what it meant to society. So let's get into this. I mean, you might go into this not knowing anything about Bob Dylan, and I think you're gonna leave the same way, not really knowing a lot about him. You never really learn anything about Dylan's past. Was he in a circus? Is Bob Dylan his real name? Who knows? But does it matter? Not really. Maybe it doesn't. This isn't about finding the truth or who this man is. It's about his role in the world and the genre. This is the exploration of a young artist revolutionizing a genre stuck in the past and stuck in its ways. I really enjoyed how the film differentiates fame with artistic freedom. Like, that's a huge question that's constantly hovered over in this film. Bob Dylan, it's not about giving us a historical biography that's perfectly 100% accurate. It's him navigating from, I guess, 19 or 20 years old, like he says in the film, in a 4-year period of him being so young, but having so much pressure on him and still trying to reach for artistic artistic freedom, because that's true fame to him and true, I don't know, music rather than just playing other people's songs. You can be the most famous man alive and have all the money in the world, but if you're just doing remakes of other people's music and covers of other people's stuff, are you really fulfilled? I don't think so. People like how you interpret other people's work, but you're not your own person or your own creative force. And that's what a lot of the early Dylan in this film is dealing with. I really enjoyed James Mangold not pulling his punches and showing Bob as a self-centered, complicated, rude person. And apparently Bob Dylan was also very involved, at least. He's never met Timothée Chalamet, but apparently he and James Mangold worked very closely. There was this story today that Bob Dylan acted out every scene himself when he was reading the script with James Mangold or something like that, and he gave a lot of notes and he was very involved in the process. And it's kind of refreshing that they didn't want to paint this guy as some perfect dead icon like in a lot of movies. It's like he's pretty rude and unforgivable in a lot of this movie and kind of a dick to everyone. Like it says in the trailer, he didn't treat Sylvie or Joan with a lot of respect, at least in this film. And I know in real life, him and Joan had a lot more public affection and really loving each other, and they were crazy about each other in public and seemed like best friends, versus in this movie, it's a lot more of a creative relationship where they just kind of are rivals, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But I like that, like Joan says in the trailer, Bob's kind of an ass. And as much as you don't really learn about Bob Dylan in this film, the story and Timothée Chalamet's performance showcase such a layered human that turns an ordinary biopic into something worthwhile. Like, I think if someone else had played him and it wasn't as good of a performance as Timothée Chalamet, this film would be pretty forgotten. But I think it's witnessing Timothy as an insane Bob Dylan that really makes this worthwhile and made me enjoy this so much. Like, scene to scene, you are constantly trying to figure out, what is this guy about? Like, he's distracted, but he's still so attentive and he sees everything, he thinks about things. It seems like he constantly doesn't really care about anything, and he's so like short-tempered with everyone. He's snarky, he's kind of an asshole, but he actually does care about everything, and he looks at everything, and he really is paying attention, and he has so much to say. It seems like he doesn't care about you when he actually cares about a lot in the world and has very strong feelings, but the only way he knows how to really talk about anything is through music or just being abrupt in public and maybe saying things that you might want to just keep to yourself. And whether it's the Cuban Missile Crisis, civil rights, or Vietnam, like, Dylan always had a lot to say in his music, and it was really interesting to see for someone that at first glance you would think, oh, this guy doesn't really care about others, all he cares about is his own fame. I loved how much of an advocate he is for things, and I loved how scene to scene your interpretation of him really does change. Like, I think my expectations of who this guy was were kind of subverted a lot throughout the film. I go from thinking he's such a jerk to, wow, he's so profound and observant, and his lyrics are really just cutting through all of the gray stuff and just saying exactly how people are feeling. So it's just like he's so intelligent, but maybe not emotionally when interacting with other people, but like as a songwriter. And I know they give a little blurb, this isn't spoiling anything, but at the end of the movie they give like a classic text blurb of what happened to everyone in the story after. And Bob Dylan's the only musician to have won a Nobel Prize in Literature for songwriting. Like, his songs are very meaningful and powerful, and it really does come across in the film. Every song he writes is just very deep and philosophical, even if you're not really an attached Bob Dylan fan. Like, I've only just recently started listening to his music because I was like, oh, it'd be fun to hear the difference when I get to the theater of like, oh wow, Timmy is really doing a perfect interpretation, which he is. His voice is spot on in the film, every song. And then after, on the car ride home, my girlfriend and I listened to some Bob Dylan music, and I was again blown away, like, holy shit, it just sounds exactly like him, and it's amazing. But I think the movie highlights an important thing. He's a 20-year-old or a 19-year-old, I guess, when the movie starts. He's a literal baby. Like, when he hit stardom, he is a young child, and it was so much pressure on such a young guy that was destined to make mistakes, destined to piss people off. And of course, he makes bad choices. Like, who wouldn't at that age, having that much power and wealth and stardom? Of course, he's immature, but he's a young guy that's experiencing a level of fame most of us couldn't dream of. Like, you think of stars today like Chappell Roan, people are like, oh, she's so rude to the public. And it's like, no, she's having her life invaded and she's still so young. Like, I think she's 25, Chappell Roan, 24, something like that. She's still extremely young. And that's so many eyes to be on you at that age when we're still ourselves trying to figure out who we are. So I don't know. I just think it painted young Bob Dylan very well, and showing that, like, this is a young guy who's still figuring out his life and what he wants his legacy to be, and such a young age to figure out what you want your legacy to be and the paths you want to take. And like, he's not good in his relationships. It's every relationship in this movie though really worked for me. Every relationship dynamic is just so well written. I loved his friendships, specifically the Johnny Cash friendship. Like I said in the intro, I had no clue they were friends, and it's so fascinating to see them on screen together. And I just loved their dynamic of this older rough and tumble artist who's been around the block trying to guide this young guy of like, nah, screw it, man, just like blow it all down, who cares? And it's like a drag some mud on the carpet, I think is what Johnny Cash says to him. And I loved all that. But also his romantic relationships were just so well written in how unavailable he kind of is in this film. And I saw one tweet this morning that was saying like, oh my god, they completely butchered the relationship with Joan. But like everyone involved in the film has said, this film is not meant to be gospel. This is just an interpretation of this time, of like one version of this story. It's not meant to be 100% accurate. So I think if you're going to get mad at historical inaccuracies with this film, you're really just screaming at clouds, because it's nothing. They're not going for that historical accuracy. They're just going off of what a book has. And also it's a film. You need to be concise in 2 hours and 20 minutes, right? I don't know. I just loved his working relationship with like Pete Seeger and the friendship, and his relationships with his love interests, but also his friendships with Johnny Cash or Woody Guthrie or whoever, you know? But let's get into some of that kind of the nuts and bolts of the film. Directing. I thought James Mangold actually did a pretty good job directing this. Like, I think Indiana Jones was a very mixed bag for me, the one that he just did. And I was hesitant when I heard James Mangold doing a Bob Dylan biopic. Like, you already kind of did Walk the Line. What's the need to go and do another musical biopic? And like I said, I don't like biopics, but I thought this was for a pretty standard biopic. I like how focused the narrative was. It really keeps its focus on Dylan, his music, his relationships, and the most important part, which is the revolution in folk music. That's what really the beating heart of this story is Dylan willing to make that step and kind of shake things up? That's what this movie is all about, this 4-year evolution of a genre. And I just loved how focused the story was. It never felt like any of the acts were kind of getting away from themselves or running away with it. It always felt like we were very focused. And he maintains just a very kind of folksy tone to the entire film and really restrains himself from doing too many big swings that I feel like maybe could have felt out of place for a Bob Dylan movie, especially, other than one aspect that I didn't like in this biopic. But like, it's a standard biopic that I think is very measured in how it does things. The editing was really great as well. I thought the film was just really, it just meshes scene to scene super well. The time jumps work really well. You never feel like we're kind of just wandering and spinning our wheels. It's 4 years only of his life, and so much happened to him, but it felt like they were really just chopping out unnecessary things and only keeping the important details. This is the rise of one of our biggest stars, but it spreads so well throughout the story, and every story beat feels equally important in how they're edited. And again, it's about the music, and the music scenes are all edited and kind of held in restraint, especially the main song, A Complete Unknown. I really liked how they edited it throughout the parts when Bob is writing, the evolution of it. So that's all I'll say, and maybe in spoilers we'll talk about it more, but like, pacing wise, that's part of the editing. But I thought it was extraordinarily paced, like 2 hours and 20 minutes for a Bob Dylan biopic. I was like, okay, like, I hope it doesn't slow down, because a lot of people can't handle over 2 hours, but it's so super concise. And to be honest, this movie flew by. Like, it ended and I was shocked, like, oh, that's it, like it's done. We really got there to 1965 quickly because of how enjoyable it was. Like, the music really helped as well because of how catchy everything is and how much fun it is to watch the performances, specifically Timothée Chalamet losing himself as Bob Dylan. It's just very fun. Whether it's Dylan and Joan cursing each other out on stage or Dylan experimenting in the studio, it all just flies by. And I think every act has something to show you. And like, in comparison to Nosferatu, every act is equally entertaining and really keeps the focus of the story on the people that it's built up in the first act. And I just really enjoy that. Sure, it involves people as the story moves on, but it all still feels very like, oh, we're just watching Bob. And as much as he's changed in so much in these 4 years, it still feels like the same struggle that we're watching throughout the 2 hours, 20 minutes. Maybe some nitpicks. It did do that thing at times, like I said at the start, making a mountain out of a molehill. So there's quite a few times where someone hears Bob Dylan for the first time and it's like they're making eye contact with God, and it feels a little bit over the top melodramatic. It's mostly the studio guys, I would say, who are like, who is this? Oh my God. And it just kind of takes you out of it. It's like, ah, yes, I forgot we're watching a biopic. And as much as it does tell a very focused biopic story about these 4 years, it doesn't really feel revolutionary in any way. Like, the story is extremely tame, I guess, or mundane, but it's the performances that are just making it so special, and kind of the craftsmanship of the film. Like a lot of Nosferatu as well. It's just nice nice to look at. Same with this film, but I think the performances even more in this film are really saving this script. If it was a different cast, less memorable performances, I think the ratings and reviews of this film would be a lot lower than what it is now. But look, overall, really entertaining. I was shocked how much I loved this. I had so much fun watching it and learning. And sure, it's a pretty standard biopics, but like these performances in this movie are special. You're not going to be disappointed. The movie achieves everything it needs to and makes you want to listen to Bob Dylan after. I think that's the main part, is you're intrigued. Even if you're not a fan, you're intrigued after to go out and search things about him. Like my girlfriend knew nothing about Bob Dylan, hadn't really heard his music, but after was like, that was so interesting to learn about. And is that not what you want out of this? So I really liked A Complete Unknown. I'd recommend it 100%, and it's a very solid 4 out of 5 stars for me. But let's get into some spoilers, which is weird because it's a historical piece. So like, I'm just going to tell you what's happened in the past, I guess, but let's get into spoilers. All right, spoilers for A Complete Unknown. So I really liked the fact that there's only one scene in the movie that's almost sort of shining light on Bob Dylan's past. Otherwise, the film is just laser focused on making him very mysterious and hard to understand. And that scene as well is super quick at the party when one of Sylvie's friends is looking through one of Bob's like childhood books or whatever with all of his photos and his background. And that's maybe a minute and a half scene. Other than that in the film, you never get to know about the past of Bob Dylan. Like his name's Robert Zimmerman. That's actually true. And of course, in real life, you know, you can go on his Wikipedia page now and there's tons of information about his upbringing and who he was and his full family history or whatever. Whereas in the movie, it's so restricted and restrained. And that's the only little glimpse we get into the magic behind the man or whatever, the Oz behind the curtain or whatever it is. So I really like that. I thought James Mangold did a really great job. And I liked how as well in that scene, it's showing that Sylvie's kind of protective of Bob, and it was always Sylvie protecting Bob and him not realizing what he had. Like him, Bob Dylan letting Joan play all of his music in live shows and stuff like that, and Sylvie being like, oh, she's playing your songs again, like why don't you record them or something like that. And he's like, I like letting other people perform or whatever. And Sylvie's like, but you're a good performer, how are you going to make yourself known if you're just playing covers? And that's, I think, where a lot of Bob Dylan's inspiration came from, was Sylvie really pushing him. So I liked how defensive Sylvie was of Bob, and that's why, the It Ain't Me Babe at the 1965 Newport Folk Festival was maybe one of the most effective scenes of the movie for me. It's during the daytime and Bob's singing, I guess, about Sylvie and maybe about Joan as well, but instead of saying these things to Sylvie, it's on stage for the world to hear. And it's kind of heartbreaking because he's never just real and authentic to Sylvie's face. Everything he feels, you only get glimpses of in the songs, and it's that's got to be so frustrating to be in his personal life and be like, the only time you say real things are to strangers in your songs, but never to us. That's maybe what tears her apart. So when she left, that's when I really felt Bob Dylan was at his most vulnerable. You can see there's kind of fear in him that you don't see in the rest of the film. It's like he's always the one with the answers and the one that's most arrogant. But in that scene, you really do see him shrink and become a 24-year-old, 23-year-old that's scared of losing someone that he loves, especially. So if I'm going to show, an Oscar reel or whatever, the clip that they used to show at the Oscars of someone's performance, I would show that Sylvie scene for Elle Fanning and for Timothée Chalamet. And even if it's not totally accurate to real life, I don't care, but his relationship with Joan was also really interesting because it's more competitive than anything else, I'd say. It really feels like he really only likes to be around her when he's brainstorming or he wants to brag about something or feel that spark. Like he's only around her in moments where he needs to become a better artist. And it's just a very fascinating dynamic they had. Like they really felt like fierce rivals and competitive in this film rather than romantically involved. It just feels like they happened to be sleeping together. And that's what that one person on Twitter this morning had an issue with. But like, I don't really care about that. I thought that worked, this version of Bob Dylan's life that they're trying to tell. And maybe, I don't know, it's more about them being the opposite ends of the spectrum artistically. Like Joan is someone that's just very comfortable playing the same things over and over. We got to let them play Blowing in the Wind or whatever. And Bob's like, I'm so sick of playing that song. Please don't make me do it. And he throws a tantrum on stage. stage, whereas she's professional, lives by the rules of the studio, all that stuff, and he just doesn't really care. But she's also in some ways, I think, using him a little bit for his songs. So, while he uses her in some kind of humiliating way, she's kind of doing the same thing. So it's very competitive, even though I do think they do love each other, but she's everything he doesn't want to be in music. One of the most striking moments or analogies in the film was Pete Seeger visiting Bob on the final morning of the 65 Newport Festival, and he gives this teeter-totter analogy that folk music is, it's like this teeter-totter, and every day people are trying to fill up this bucket that's on the opposite side of a teeter-totter with a spoon of sand every day to try and tip it so it's more accessible, and every year the festival is bringing more people with their spoons trying to fill up this bucket. I'm kind of butchering the analogy, but he kind of says that, like, Bob, you brought a shovel of sand to tip that teeter-totter. He's saying he has way more power than any folk musician has ever had, and it was just amazing to show kind of the power of Bob Dylan, but also I think that really showed Edward Norton how he maybe deserves a nomination from this film, and that analogy was just so mind-blowing in the scene, and maybe one of my favorite aspects of the film. And I really liked his relationship with Pete in general. Very interesting. Pete was sort of this guardian who just happened to sort of guide Bob Dylan on his way to stardom and be like, oh, you write pretty good music, and he presented him, and they had a very complicated relationship. And like I said earlier, Pete's wife Toshi also brought an interesting element to the story. Like at the end, when there's this huge revolt of him playing electric at the festival, she almost seems defensive of Bob or wants to protect Pete and be like, it's not worth being so dogmatic, like just let it happen, let the music evolve, give the people what they maybe want to hear. And it's so strange, but I really liked Toshi's involvement. It's just an interest. She doesn't have a lot of lines, but it's very fascinating to see her role in the story, and she kind of plays this silent watcher of Bob Dylan's evolution. I really liked when Mangold in his directing repeated shots in the film to show an evolution. So the night of the Cuban Missile Crisis, when everything is really going down, he shows like garbage in the streets and the world's not really moving and everyone's just frantically moving around, to the next day things are completely normal, everything's clean, people are just walking around hanging out. And also he repeats a shot, the 64 festival versus 65. So 64, Dylan's playing kind of his traditional music and not electric, playing harmonica, everyone's going nuts but respectfully and still loving it, versus 65, people are throwing bottles, they're throwing stuff on stage, going absolutely crazy. And it was just such a fun contrast between those 2 years. So just nice little quiet, directing choices that show the evolution of this story, I guess. I think it was really interesting how Bob Dylan, as famous as he got in the story, he's kind of always keeping his roots of just being a Woody Guthrie fan and a friend. Like that was just such a nice touch to kind of make him really almost paint him as a good guy in the end, but in a respectful way, or like an earned way that, well, as big as he got and maybe he made some rough choices, at the end he was still kind of doing the basic things that he needed to do or that he set out to do, because the whole movie starts with him wanting to see Woody Guthrie in the hospital, and 4 years later he's still seeing him and he's still a fan of him, and Woody Guthrie is a huge fan of him in the end. So it just shows that like a lot of these human elements of Bob really stuck with him throughout the 4 years, as complicated as he was, and the stardom never really meant anything to Bob. All he cared about was his music, artistic freedom, and he earned all of that at the Newport Festival in 65. Like he was just really pushing himself through these 4 years to do something special. And the ending in general, I thought the movie just really tied together nicely with Bob visiting Woody and, his tangled relationship with Sylvie that really didn't work out, and Johnny Cash, Joan. I really like that they brought everyone to the festival in 65, whether that's true or not, and maybe they were there at different times. It doesn't matter. I think cinematically, the ending really worked to me, and that's, again, every act of the story really worked, and it didn't feel like we were ever wandering. I think the first act showing him like kind of discovering his roots, the second act being a struggling artist and trying to really branch out on his own, and then the third act is him really struggling to come to terms with artistic freedom and what he needs to do to obtain that. It's nice that the movie ended on a human touch, like I said, with Woody, or with Pete as well. He goes to see him that day and he sees him putting chairs away and he rides away, and I think that was Pete in that moment being like, oh yeah, he still cares about me, even if he is very different and he's still a star, he's still a human that just cares about the music. And same with Joan, seeing him the day when he's about to take off, all that stuff. I think it just worked really well of humanizing Bob in the end, as much of an asshole as he was. And also Bob's choice to go out and play an acoustic song after he's caused a huge revolt playing electric, I think that worked really well. But to wrap up spoilers, I don't know, this was super effective for me. Maybe as a historian I'm a sucker for historical tales, but this was merely an interpretation of those 4 years, so it's not all meant to be 100% true. But either way, I was sold completely. I really enjoyed this. Timothée Chalamet, maybe his career best best. It's such a phenomenal performance, and the whole supporting cast is great. The story's entertaining enough, but it's really the performances that sold me. It's a solid 4 out of 5, like I said, and I really want to watch A Complete Unknown again. But let's get into what else I watched. Oh man, okay, we have a lot to talk about and what else I watched. Let's start with books. Justice League, New 52, Volume 2, The Villain's Journey. Did I talk about this last week? I don't think so, but I really enjoyed it. The best part of the book for me was the villain, Graves, who is kind of the consequences of the Justice League themselves and everything that they represent. I loved that all. So I'm moving on to a Superman story now only. I think it's called Superman and the Supermen or something like that. It's him way in the future. He travels to like 3,500 or something like that. I'm excited to read that. But let's move into TV shows and movies because there's a ton to talk about. So let's start with TV shows. Creature Commandos, Episode 4, Weasel's origin story. Amazing. I was teary-eyed at the end. It's so sad. I never would have thought Weasel, who was a complete freak in the Suicide Squad, would maybe be one of the most heartfelt characters, and he cares. And one of the children at the orphanage looked exactly like the princess, played by Maria Baklova. So is there a tie there, or was it just like an animation choice that, yeah, they kind of look similar? I don't know what's up with that, but a very fascinating story. I'm going to watch episode 5, actually the day this comes out, on the Monday, and yes, I'll put a video out on it, of course. But let's talk about the Dune Prophecy finale. Season 1, I guess, not really the series. Episode 6. Interesting. I thought maybe the strongest episode entertainment-wise of the series. It ended on a really strong note, and surprisingly, when it wrapped up, I was like, oh, I'm kind of excited for a season 2. I still think a lot of people have compared it to season 1 of Game of Thrones, that there was a lot about season 1 of Game of Thrones that didn't work and felt messy, but then it really picked up in season 2. So maybe that could happen for Dune Prophecy. Maybe season 2 revolutionizes itself and the script is a lot tighter. There's no pacing issues. The dialogue is really cleaned up. But for the most part, I thought season 1 was a lot more positives than negatives. I felt the Carino kids were really holding back the story a lot of the time, and the Atreides revolution. All that stuff was kind of boring to me, but I really liked everything with the sisterhood. Emily Watson, I thought she was great in the show, as well as her sister Tula, and I loved all the flashback things, especially all of the sequences, like the big sequences they're going through with the mind virus and everything like that. Everything kind of psychedelic about the show really worked to me, so I had a lot of fun. Another finale that we had, this one being a series finale, What We Do in the Shadows, episode 11 of season 6, the finale. Not great, to be honest. I thought it was kind of a meh finish to the series, just nothing really, no big swings. It felt like a very safe wrap up of Guillermo being sad that the documentary crew is leaving, and it didn't really feel like they were going for anything extraordinary, that, oh yeah, they're just going to kind of tell us exactly what's going to happen with the characters in the future, which is they're going to do the exact same things they did now, because everything they've done in life, they've just kind of repeated every 100 years. So I don't know, it was kind of a safe finale. They didn't really go for any big swings or big character moments. It was just kind of disappointing, a little bit subdued, and I was surprised for a crazy show like What We Do in the Shadows that they really played it safe in their finale. So I don't know, maybe you could argue the final season was the weakest. When it got to the final couple episodes, they were kind of spinning their wheels, but I still enjoyed it for the most part, and I would recommend it. All right, Pop Culture Jeopardy. I watched episode 10 to 12. A lot of fun. I think it's just getting stronger and stronger, and Colin Jost is just a great host of the series, but it's Pop Culture Jeopardy. I don't really have tons to say, so I'm going to move on to Survivor Cagayan, which we luckily found another website that has the episodes. So we watched episodes 3 to 7 last night. So great. Tony gets the heaviest winner edit that I've ever seen in a Survivor, to be honest. It's so clear from the edit how they're painting him as this grand player, and we were surprised that Sarah goes out first in the merge. I mean, she wins Game Changers in the future, but I was surprised that she really gets blindsided after thinking she's this monumental swing vote when it's actually Cass that flips and gets her out. So yeah, Survivor Cagayan, a great season. I'm thinking we're probably going to watch Blood versus Water next, because I want to see Tyson's winning season. He's my favorite Survivor player of all time, so I'd love to see Tyson's winning season. But let's get into movies, because it was the holidays, so I watched so much stuff. 7 movies total, starting with The Polar Express from 2004. Massively disliked it. I think it's a very fun story and very inventive, but dear God, the animation is terrifying. I hate the rotoscoping motion capture. Anytime someone's far away from the camera, their animation just like fades out and they're this vague vague figure in the background. So I massively disliked it, but I still gave it 2.5 stars because I somewhat enjoyed it. Then a movie that really blew my expectations away, Juror Number 2, the 2024 film with Nicholas Hoult, directed by Clint Eastwood. I was very surprised how great it was. It's such an interesting dilemma. I almost don't want to talk about it too much because it's a very fun movie that if you kind of just go in blind, it's surprising what the story is. So I gave it 4 stars, loved it a lot, thought it's very well acted. There's some interesting story beats that I think don't quite work, but for the most part, it's a very fun movie that I'd recommend. Then Superman Returns from 2006, another Bryan Singer superhero movie. Interesting, not as bad as I remember, but it's still a quite boring Superman movie that I think is way too long, has way too many swings that it's going for, trying to do too many things with Superman and everyone's just kind of cheering, completely abandons Clark Kent pretty much the entire movie and is really just going for crowd cheering moments of Superman and these big heroic things. I don't know, it's a lot happening in it and it's just very gray as well. I wish it was a little bit more colorful, but still kind of bronzy, which was nice like a comic book. So I gave it 3 stars. I think it's better than Man of Steel, but still worse than, say, Superman the movie or Superman 2. All right, Wonka. I showed it to my family on the holidays. So much fun. Rewatching it, I actually enjoyed it. The rewatchability of the film is very high. It's just so much fun, and seeing Timothée Chalamet give a goofy, silly performance is so enjoyable, and the comedy is great in it. And it's a kid's movie, but it's like so watchable with your family over the holidays. The music's great, like Scrub Scrub and World of Imagination, and all of the song where they're trying to get the cop to agree to their deal was so much fun as well. Just like every musical number in it just works so well, and I just thought it was so much fun overall. Still 4 stars for me. I saw it in theaters last year, absolutely loved it, and maybe it's one of the most surprising movies of 2023 of how much I enjoyed it, because when they announced a Wonka movie, I was like, really? We're gonna do another Willy Wonka thing? But it's great. I would totally kill for a Wonka 2. If you want a fun holiday movie that you can watch with the whole family, Wonka, definitely. Then, here we go, a 2-parter, How the Grinch Stole Christmas from 1966, the TV special that's like 26 minutes long. Always loved it as a child. It's one of my favorite Christmas things to watch. We watched it, 5 stars, phenomenal. It's still like so fun and everything. I love the cartoon aspect of it. I love how short it is, but it still feels so heartfelt. That's the first part, 5 stars. Then we watched the live action movie with Jim Carrey, a movie I've loved since I was a child. I think Jim Carrey's giving an Oscar-worthy performance as the Grinch, and it's just crazy, the practical effects and the world building that happens in that film. 4.5 stars out of 5. I loved it so much. Then, catching up on some 2024 movies that I may have missed, like Juror Number 2, we watched Bad Boys, Ride or Die. I haven't even seen the third one from like 2020, but we watched this one, and my family really likes the Bad Boy movies. It was a lot of fun, and I refuse to believe that the Batgirl movie would have been bad with those directors. I think it would have been pretty funny, would have had good action. This was a really fun 3.5 out of 5 stars for me. I was very surprised how much I enjoyed this. There was a Michael Bay cameo in it, which I was surprised by and kind of took me back, but it was good action. I loved the directing, like the point of view camera thing on the gun that's been all over Twitter and stuff like that was really great, and I had a lot of fun with it, so I would totally recommend. Honestly, everything I watched this week, maybe other than Superman Returns, like if you're not a Superman fan, don't bother with that, but everything I've watched, I would totally recommend, whether it's the TV shows, like Dune Prophecy was good, What We Do in the Shadows was good. Juror Number 2 is probably the thing I would recommend most this week that you definitely need to watch, and that's everything for what else I watched over the holiday period. And I think that's going to do it for our very special episode 50, Nosferatu and A Complete Unknown. 2 movies I've been looking forward to all year. Both have some of my favorite actors involved. I'd love to hear what you thought, and I can't believe we've done 50 episodes already. This has blown by. It's been so much fun for me. I've enjoyed every episode more than the last. This has been so much fun. As always, please rate and review the show wherever you get your good podcasts, whether that be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Acast. You can write a positive review underneath, give it 5 stars. It might be read on the show. If you're on YouTube, please like, subscribe, comment. What did you think of Nosferatu, A Complete Unknown? Which movie were you more excited to see? Which one maybe, shifted your expectations a little bit? What did you like better? Do you think Timothée Chalamet is going to get an Oscar? Do you think Lily Rose Depp's going to get an Oscar? Let me know what you thought. What have you been watching over the Christmas period? I'd love to hear from you. You can actually get in touch with the show via email, watcherofallthings@gmail.com, or you can reach us by social media. Instagram and Threads are just at Watcher of All Things, and the TikTok is watcher.of.all.things. My personal Letterboxd account, KikiJ70, that's KIKIJ70. So please rate and review the show 5 stars, like, subscribe, comment if you're on YouTube, catch up on all the social media where I post other videos, and in the new year, I'm going to be posting some YouTube only videos. Next week, it's another big episode, Baby Girl, a film that's been the talk of the town for months now since that first trailer came out. Very excited to see it. Also, I'm going to be watching tons of stuff because it's the holiday breaks, but I think that's going to do it for this very special and a bit longer of an episode with a double feature review. Thank you all so much for the kind words. As always, I hope you had a wonderful holiday period. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next one.